Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Represented series, Fireside Edition. Really excited for you all to be here, and thank you for joining us today. I'm excited for you to meet our next guest, who is Olivia Smith. Olivia, welcome to the Represented series.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Really been looking forward to having you on the series and just kind of catching up to all the amazing things that I see you doing and that I
Yeah.
know that you're doing. But definitely want to make space to highlight all of your wonderful work. So before we dive in,
Yeah.
just tell a little bit about yourself and what you do and anything else you want to add there.
Sure. So I am an estate planning, elder law, and probate attorney here in Georgia. Um, really focusing in the African American community. I'm from Georgia, which these days seems to be a rarity. From here, went to Spelman, went away for law school, but came back home to practice. And I didn't start in this area, didn't really know a lot about it when I started practice. But through circumstances in my own family, really got kind of a crash course in estate planning, in the lack of estate planning, and that really piqued my curiosity. And so these days I try to do for other people's families with what I was unable to do for my family at the time, just because I wasn't a lawyer yet and certainly didn't have the knowledge that I have now to help families with their estate planning, really thinking about, because that's not obviously something that a lot of people think about, what they want their legacy to be. What is going to happen if they pass away? What is going to happen if they get sick? So I feel like my job as an estate planning attorney now, there's a lot of counsel that goes on as well, just asking questions and getting families to consider things that perhaps they have not considered as of yet.
Awesome. And that's really so important. So many things that you said, right? A lot of times we don't end up in certain professions until we've gone through some sort of experience that just made us thrust into the world. So what was that like for you? And what did you do before becoming an attorney?
So I've always been an attorney, but I went to law school actually to be a criminal defense attorney. That is what I saw kind of in my community and with family, friends, and people that I knew that there was a need for. Good, criminal defense attorneys that really cared about their client, that wanted, the best outcome. So that is really why I went to law school. And when I came out of law school, that's where I started my career. Um, but I learned kind of fast that I felt like I was pretty good at it. I still like the courtroom. I like hearings and trials, but it wasn't necessarily good for me. I felt like I cared too much. I got too involved. It really impacted me when cases and hearings didn't go my way, because I was always kind of thinking about my client and their family and what that impact was going to mean for them. And then the other reason was just there were so many other needs that I could not fulfill as a criminal defense attorney. Oftentimes, clients came to me and there were mental health issues and there were housing needs and there were all these other needs that got them to the point that they needed a criminal defense attorney. And I oftentimes felt helpless because I could only focus on this one little thing, knowing that all the other circumstances hadn't changed. So the likelihood was they were going to be back. And so it wasn't fulfilling for me. And so after a few years doing that, I kind of started looking around, searching, trying to figure out, okay, what else can I do? And over the course of a few years, it that is what led me to estate planning, elder law, and probate work. In my own family, my grandparents passed, and when my grandparents passed, they'd had the foresight to do planning. But I'm from a small town, and so what happened was they went to the town attorney, which is who everyone goes to, and he didn't do a lot of counsel. He just kind of did what they asked him to do. My grandparents had 13 children, and so they left their modest home that sat on like an acre and a half of land to all 13 children equally. And so you can imagine what that looked like. And some of their children had predeceased them. So there were some grandchildren that then entered the picture into the mix of all of these people trying to figure out what to do with this one home and a little bit of property. And so that really opened my eyes to the importance. And you can plan, but if you don't effectively plan, it's almost like you didn't plan at all. And so you can imagine the chaos and the back and forth that caused within my family, trying to figure out what to do with it, who was going to get it, all of these things. And ultimately, my family resolved what to do with the property. But um, being proud of my grandparents that they even knew that they needed to go and get planning, but then understanding really what ineffective planning looked like and what that did and the chaos and confusion that caused, it really piqued my interest. That on top of I'm from a farming town, small town, growing up, more cows than people. It's changed over the years, but a lot of the wealth of those Black families in that community was the land. Like, they didn't have liquid assets, but they had land. And seeing so many families lose their land over the years because they hadn't done any planning, it wind up going to kids that didn't feel the same way about it. And so people were able to come in and offer cash, but half the value of it or a fraction of the value, and get that property. And then those families and those later generations not really understanding the value that they had, and the multitude of options that they could have used that land for to create income, legacy, wealth for their family, but just not knowing. And so many Black families in my little town now, they don't have the land that their parents and their grandparents had worked so hard to attain. Like an investor came in or another family came in and bought that land up from them. So I started to really look around and my eyes were open and started to see that happen. And I think that is really what kind of pushed me to say, okay, I think I can just do this full time.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like we keep going through a lot of that over and over again, especially in these times, right? We just had a lot of this very public with Chadwick Boseman, and him
Absolutely.
having to pay, like, I think it was almost a billion or over that or something around there to the state, which should have not happened, right? We're still giving so much back to others that should not receive the benefit and the legacy that those individuals work so hard for, and especially when it comes to land. You're talking a lot about what it means to be Black and own property and own land, and that being of so much value, and us still having that disconnect with that level of value versus just the immediate rush of here's cash, right? And here's money now. And there's all these things that I know that I could do with this cash versus I'm not really certain what I could do with this land, although it holds so much value and so much legacy. How do you help walk clients through that space of understanding the value and the importance of those things, and make sure that, hey, we need to take a look and figure out how we actually plan a strategy around this, so we're not rushing to make these very short-term decisions and taking this cash?
I do a few things, and I feel like that is the part of my job that is the counsel, because to be able to advise clients, you really have to understand why they came to see you. What are their goals? What is it that they want to see happen? What is it that they want their legacy to be? And I think part of understanding that then allows you to advise them. And so I have tough conversations with my clients that I don't know if they appreciate or not. I hope that they do. But part of those conversations is, okay, who are you leaving your assets to? And I asked them, okay, you have this home. Is this like a family home that you want to stay in the family, that you want to be a place of refuge and a resource for generations to come? Or is this something, a home you just bought and you don't care if it's sold? Is this land that you want to maintain and you would like for your family to add to help create wealth for future generations? Or are you just, not tied to it? And so I think first understanding the goals of each individual family couple that comes, and that's something I had to learn, because sometimes I had my own ideas about what should happen, and I'm like, wait, this is not my planning, this is their planning. So that was the first thing, really understanding the goals of each person, and because they differ. So that's the first thing. The second thing is helping families and clients understand, because we serve a lot of seniors, a lot of older clients, helping them understand that there's two ways to look at planning. There's definitely planning after you pass away, which is what most of us think of when we think of planning. There's also long-term care planning. And so really talking to them and walking through that with them. Okay, what happens if you get sick? What happens if you can't stay in your home? Are you going to a nursing home? Are you going to a long-term care facility? Are you going to your kids or your grandkids' home? Are they going to take care of you? Have you thought about these things? Have you asked them? Because oftentimes clients will say, I'm moving in with my daughter. And I'm like, did your daughter agree to this? Does she know you're moving in? So really even getting them thinking about, okay, there's planning for after I pass, but then there's also planning while I'm still here and I may be sick or incapacitated or not be able to take care of myself. Either way, I want to maintain the things that I've worked my entire life for. I don't want that going to the state or going to people that I don't know. So the second thing is helping them understand that. And then I would say the third thing is really having those honest conversations about the people in your family. And that is really oftentimes a really tough conversation. And I tell my clients, you know your family. I don't know them. And just because, your son is the oldest doesn't necessarily mean he should be in charge, doesn't necessarily mean he should inherit. Does he feel the same way about this house, this property, these assets that you feel? And if he doesn't, perhaps there is someone that would be better suited to fulfill this role. And so I do a lot of talk about being equitable without being equal, because a lot of times clients want to leave their house to all three kids and together, and you're like, do they get along? Do they like each other? Did they fight growing up? Because chances are they're going to revert back to this after you pass. And so the point of planning is to cut down on chaos and confusion, not to create more. And to be able to do that, you have to take a realistic look at your family and the dynamics of your family members and be able to plan accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so tough sometimes to have those conversations or even acknowledge, especially, in a lot of African American communities where these weren't conversations that we were typically used to having, right? It was just like, well, it just passes down to whomever kind of wants it. Or,
Mhm.
there's always that person who, really wanted it more than others, but they don't seem to always get into the mix of things. And it's just left to everyone. And then, to your point and what you experienced, everyone's just kind of figuring out what to do and how to do it. And that also causes, more conflict, right? When you're going through also a grieving period, right? It's like you're also
Absolutely.
going through grief of losing this individual. And then on top of that, you're having to deal with everyone's pain in the moment, everyone's pain in processing. And then, that can lead to unfortunate things, especially in our community where we're still learning and getting around this curve of making sure that we're establishing and keeping the wealth that our grandparents and great grandparents and all of those really wanted us to have. So how do you really go back to kind of building that trust? And you probably do this in a lot of the conversations that you're having, because you got to have those keep it real conversations with families, right? Not everyone gets along. Not everyone really liked so and so, and I think a lot of that gets exposed in these situations. But do you think, having a lot of these conversations in these real, like, hey, moments where let's sit down and let's really have an honest conversation about this, do you feel like that's a way for us to continue to build trust, how you're building trust with your clients, and then also in the greater arena of just being, someone who's of color, African American, who's trying to understand this when we've kind of been excluded from a lot of these conversations?
Absolutely. I think, also people read on my website and then I talk about my own experience. And so I think even though I am the professional, I get it. We all have families. We all have those difficult family dynamics. And so I try to speak to people from that place, not a place of judgment at all, a place of understanding, and a place that I want my clients to understand that my goal is whatever your goal is. So, how do we achieve why you came to see me? And that is my intention throughout our interaction. And even after, we've done the planning, because I feel like we become family attorneys. It's not a one and done with us. And so checking on them, asking them, have things changed in their life? Do they need to update? Having those difficult conversations, but doing it from a place of understanding. And I think also education, because I want clients to leave knowing what they did. So many clients come to me and they hand me papers because maybe they need to update, or maybe they need to do different planning. They previously done some and they have no idea what their previous planning was, what those documents say. And I think part of gaining trust is educating clients so that they feel empowered and they understand, this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it, and this is going to be the intended outcome of doing that. And then, the tough love, as I said before, saying, okay, let's pause for a second. Why is this person going to be your executor, or why is this person going to be your trustee? And if the best answer you can give me is because they're the oldest, then we need to have a further conversation. Or, really understanding, because I have families that come in, and this is throughout most of our families. They may have a family member that's on drugs, or that's in and out of jail, or have those challenges. And then the question is, okay, is giving them this part of your, assets, this part of your estate, is that the best decision? Is there a way that we can benefit them without giving it directly to them? Is there a way that we can benefit their kids? Because oftentimes seniors come see me. I mean, they love their kids, whatever. The grandkids is what get them into my office. They want to make sure the grandkids are okay. They want to make sure the grandkids, are able to go to college or get a car. They want to make sure what they have is going to get to the grandkids in a lot of situations. And so, how do we get it to the grandkids, even though sometimes maybe the parent may not be the best conduit? And so I think even though there are tough conversations to have, I think they respect that and they know that I'm looking out for them. And I have those conversations with grandchildren and children, because they are often the ones that bring their parents or grandparents in the office. And I tell them, you're not my client. And thank you for bringing them. They really need to do this work. Now I'm going to have to kick you out, because your parent or your grandparent is my client. And I need to know what it is that they would like, not what you would like for them to want. And so I think when they see how I handle those situations, and they see that I'm really interested in what their goals are and what they want, I think that really goes a long way to building trust with clients.
Oh yeah, and it's great that they're coming in and bringing them in and actually getting at least a piece of the experience. Because I feel like that's what a lot of you're doing is you're bringing this full experience where it's not just, hey, here's the documents, here's the legal jargon, and you kind of go about your business. It's
Right.
really getting to know and understanding the family, because every family dynamic is going to be different. Every family dynamic is going to be, some more complex than others. I can imagine the stories
Oh yeah,
you
all the
probably
stories.
have. I was like, we'd have to have a separate fireside chat for all of the like interesting stories to unpack. But what do you feel, especially as you're starting to engage this next generation, which is so tech savvy, and we have all of these different apps, and I appreciate all of those things and think that they're great, but they may not be solving the overarching problem of people actually getting, not necessarily getting things done, because that seems to be somewhat easy, but it's really the understanding. And how do you think that this next generation is really understanding the mechanics of the things that they might be finding on the internet? And, oh, let's fill out this form because this app has this and this app has that, and I know I've got it done, but it's like, do you really know what you just did, and if it really covers the breadth of what you need it to?
No, I think that's absolutely the challenge. I think part of it is good because that means that we are able to get to them easier through social media. But I think the other challenge is there's also so many other people getting to them. And so how do they know what voice to listen to? I think that is the challenge. We're competing. We're competing against hold on. We're competing against other voices. What I do like about grandkids and kids bringing their grandparents and parents in is though that the conditioning starts early, right? So they may not be ready to do their estate planning. They may not be thinking of it for themselves, but through bringing their grandparents in and bringing their parents in, they know that, okay, this is something that I do need to do. And maybe they are hearing through sitting in on part of the meeting, they're hearing things that are little nuggets that are somewhere in their mind that they may come back to later. And so I think a large part of the problem is education. And that is the case regardless of socioeconomic status. I think sometimes we think, oh, these people are making millions. Of course, they've done their estate planning. And you mentioned Chadwick Boseman. That is not the case. It's a lack of education across the board. And so they are getting some of that education through bringing family members in. And then what we try to do at our firm, because education is such a big part of our firm, is we're on social media. We do presentations. We want to get the word out. What we've seen is there is not a built-in sense of urgency like when I was in the criminal world. You have a charge, there is a trial date, you don't have time, you need an attorney. That is not the same thing with estate planning. And so through education, we understand that there may be a longer courting period before we get them in, but we're dropping little nuggets along the way that they are being able to consume in short amounts of time, small pieces. And then, we have clients that come in and they're like, oh, I was at your presentation 2 years ago. And now I'm coming in. I heard you speak or I saw your video a year ago. And now I'm coming. So it's continuously providing the information and giving the opportunity for people to consume it. And giving those stories that they can really identify with. Most of the time, if you've had someone pass away in your family and you've had to go through the probate process and it didn't go well, you're going to come on in because you understand, you really understand what that looks like and how that affects the family. And so I really think education and awareness is really the key.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I never really thought about it from that perspective around, hey, yes, you have, if you're a criminal justice attorney and you have you have a deadline, right? Your deadline
Right.
is you not going to prison or solving this case or whatever it is, but it's like you would think that we would have that same sense of urgency. Because to some degree, it's, not necessarily the same, but at the same time, like that level of sense of urgency and having that wealth and that money and that ability to not have certain things happen should be at the same level. But we also think that since we can't physically see it, right? I think
Mhm.
that's the hard part is like you can see where you might end up on the other side, but when it comes to your money, you can't necessarily see that until something's sold and someone buys it and you watch them put like $1 million home on your property and you got probably a third of that, if that. And then it hits home. And that level of frustration that we all are seeing now with, a lot of different things within gentrification and how that's really affecting a lot of our communities where it's like, hey, we used to own a lot of property in these neighborhoods and now we don't. And these are legacies that are lost. These are millions on millions of dollars. I mean, to calculate it would make us all just absolutely sick.
Sick.
Uh,
Yes,
but how do you think,
absolutely.
yeah, absolutely, right? And how do you think we start to really create and help towards that sense of urgency because we want this next generation to really not just do better, but really to know and understand why cash is just cash, but the value and the legacy is where that's what other people understand when it comes to money and value that we aren't still we're still wrestling with understanding.
I think a couple things. I think honestly, that is where younger generations come in because this is your inheritance. And so really getting them to understand that yes, my client is your parents or your grandparents most of the time. But this is your inheritance. You're the one that stands to gain from the planning. And so oftentimes our focus is twofold. It's the actual client, but it's also the people that stand to benefit from what the client is doing. And I think are being open and this is happening a lot more now. I'm seeing younger people doing more with land, wanting to grow their own, vegetables and farm. People are going back to farming and animals. So I'm seeing like a return to the land. I think for a while we were like, we're over this. Like we're trying to go into, corporate. And especially in my family, my grandparents, that farming was that was their livelihood. And so I think there has been a return to the land that I'm seeing, which I'm excited about, but also really understanding what that means and what you can do with that land. Like how is that land valuable? How can it work for me? And I don't want to talk about like years and years down the road, but like what are things that we can do with this land now? What are things that we can do with this home? Because I don't want to live in my parents' home. I have my own, but like how are ways that we can make that profitable for us now so that there is a concerted interest to keep it, and you can benefit now, but you're also creating legacy because you're maintaining it and you're not giving it away. I think that's important. Um, I work closely with some attorneys that specifically work with farmers, Black farmers, that specifically work on what is called heirs property, because what has happened for a lot of us is grandma or mom passed and they didn't have a will and it went to everybody. And so now we own 1/30th or 1/15th or 1/10 of this estate of this land. And what do we do with that? Or which is, we'll have to wait to story time. But or what I see happening often is granddad died 30 years ago. We never probated his estate. His home is still in his name. Now, my uncle lived there and then he passed, and then my cousin is living there, but the home is still in my grandfather's name that died 30 years ago. There is a lot of that. And so part of that is untangling those titles. It's called tangle titles, untangling those titles and making sure rightful owners have the paperwork to back up that they are the owners of that property, and then really educating them on how that property, that home, that farm can be profitable to them right now, to compete with people that are coming and offering cash for it.
Oh yeah, and as you're talking and I'm listening, it's like I do love seeing like this go back to farming and to raising, our. I mean, I see a lot of my friends on social media. They have chickens and they have farms and they're growing their own vegetables, and it's beautiful to see them be able to just utilize the land around them, and then also start to look at other places to buy more land to figure out what to do with now. Because to your point, I feel like we always either we're inheriting something and we're just like, oh, like what am I supposed to do with this thing,
Mhm.
right? It like becomes this thing in this weight of I'm not going to see any return from this later on, and it's like no, there's a multitude of things to do with it. Especially if you have land and what you could build on it and not be such in a rush to just let it go and let someone else come in and build the wealth that you could have really established, had you even just taken the time to just pause and go talk to someone, even if it's just a quick meeting just to see what your options are. And it made me immediately think of Queen Sugar, right? I don't know anyone on here who might
Yes.
be watching this
Yeah.
that's familiar with that show, but it's built around a lot of this land, that was inherited by, the kids. And, as you kind of continue to watch the show, they go through this process of possibly losing the land and how it was titled and all these different things that come up, and creating a Black Farmers Union and all this other stuff that I think is also very, where we are now with a lot of things
Mhm.
going on in this country and having to fight for things because stuff wasn't done properly or left in a proper manner, that we can now start to kind of clean up. So it's just the educating to your point, and then also the clarity to give yourself the space to understand what you're doing and why, so that you actually want it, right? You can get excited about something.
Right.
Yeah, which
No,
is like the biggest
absolutely.
thing. So it's exciting to see this change. So what kind of brings you joy? Because I know you talked a lot about farming and growing up on this farm and how you have an appreciation for that. So is that kind of part of what brings you joy? Is that something that you're kind of going back to or looking more into?
I am. So um I am looking at buying potentially my grandparents' home. And I think as the world gets crazier, what for me, what I've realized, and just through this work, I love older people. Talking to them and their wisdom is, I feel like sometimes we have more education, we have more things, and we feel like somehow perhaps we have arrived or arrived or doing better. But I feel like the older generation, they were on to something. And maybe they didn't have all the resources and tools and education that we have, but this innate understanding of what is important, and what is the source of like joy and family and bringing people together. I feel like they were on to something. So that is something I'm definitely looking into. But I will say, and I a few years ago I didn't know that I would ever say this. I love my clients. Like I love the work that we do. I feel like the work that I do is so important. And I feel like when I'm able to help clients and I am actually providing value, not just to them, but to their entire family, and they appreciate it. And so that was a new feeling, because oftentimes I'd practice in other areas of law where it felt like, am I even doing any good? And so knowing that I am, and really being able to become, I feel like, family to a lot of my clients, and they come back and they ask questions, and they refer people. I love the work I do, and I only want to expand in this space and educate more people, educate more families, and get more people to really buy into this, so that we are creating legacy and maintaining and adding to the value that our families have already started. When I am not working, I love to travel. That brings me joy. That brings me joy.
Nice. You and me
Um,
both.
Yes, yes. I love to travel. I love to see how other people live and how they do things, and the beauty of the land, and of nature. is always amazing to me. So that is probably the number one thing that brings me joy outside of the work I do.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree with the travel and the nature. There's something just about being around trees and fresh air and just that space of being able to just be free and quiet as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I love what you were saying before about, how just the older generation, which is really, they're starting to look more like the younger generation. Some of them, I'm seeing these
Yes.
videos of them out doing all sorts of things and just looking good. And I'm like, what do you all clearly have
You're
no
aging
hair.
backwards. What's happening?
Seriously, like what is happening? And
Yes.
meanwhile, we're just like running around like the crazy ones. But yeah, it's like I think about, my grandmother and they just never seemed really stressed, right? They were just, they had a lot going on. They were raised a lot of kids and, enjoyed their grandkids, but they just, yeah, it's just like they just never had the weight that we seem
Right.
to have with all of the things that we have access to. So yeah, I am with you. If I had a glass, we'd cheers. We would definitely cheers to that. But super, super happy to have had you join and learn more about you and the work that you're doing and why obviously this conversation is so, so important to, so many different communities. And making sure that we are leaving those lasting legacies. So definitely tell everyone where they can find you and reach out to you.
Sure. So our website is srlawgrp.com. We are on Instagram, srlawgrp. We are on Facebook, srlawgrp. We have a podcast called Black Parents Aging, and it is geared towards people like us, the sandwich generation who may have aging parents and grandparents, trying to figure out how to navigate that and help them. And you should be able to access that wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify. It should be on all of those platforms.
Awesome. I love that title. And I'm sure there's a wealth of stories and
Oh my,
information information there.
absolutely.
So I think next time we have you back for the fireside, we're gonna have to dig into these stories because I know everyone wants to know like what really goes on in some estate planning, as much as you can kind of share.
Sure.
So thanks again, Olivia, for coming on. Super glad to have you. I know we'll have you back again. And thanks again for all the work that you're doing and all the ways that you support what we're doing here with CHIP. So happy to have you.
Thank you
And
so much. I enjoyed it.
no, absolutely. And everyone make sure you check out, our next and upcoming episodes or just catch up on the Represented series, our Fireside and our education edition as well. Have a wonderful day and please continue to stay safe as you continue to travel and go about the world. Take care.
Bye.